Okay, so happy Wednesday, guys. Hope you had a good weekend for those of you who I didn't see on Monday. And then I think next week we also get a long weekend because I think that's Easter next weekend, right? The 2nd and the 5th. We get a Friday and a Monday off. So this, I know, so excited. But today we're going to finish off with our lecture about nonverbals. And we left off on personal space on Monday. So personal space is basically just the bubble around each of us. And like I said on Monday, for Americans, it's about arm's width apart. You know, someone who we don't really know very well gets closer than arm's length, then we tend to get really uncomfortable, right? Like if I walked up to, Brianna, in the context of school or whatever, and got closer than an arm's, length apart from her, she'd probably be relatively uncomfortable. It would be breaking a social norm. But, your significant others or your family member, they're in that, they tend to be more in that intimate space bubble. But when people have different perceptions or different cultural expectations of what is correct in regards to personal space, it can definitely cause miscommunications or discomfort. Gosh, what's that story of? There's one. But here's a graphic that I like that I thought I put in your class, but I guess I didn't, about what is the appropriate distance in different countries. So the United States, if you are a close relationship, you can stand about 1.5 feet from the person. So that's, about here. So if I'm talking to my best friend or if I'm talking to my mom and she's within 2 feet of me, that's fine. Because we're a close relationship, we know each other well. For a personal acquaintance, so someone that you might be friendly with, but maybe not terribly friends, a little bit over 2 feet is the most desired. So about arm's width or arm's length apart. And then for a stranger, you want them a little bit further away at about 3 feet. But if you look at Argentina, all their distances are a little bit shorter. So if you're a close friend with someone, they might be really close to your face. If they're a stranger, they might be more in that personal distance of yours because, their stranger only stands about 2.5 feet away. And then if you look in Saudi Arabia, they have a lot further distance. So even close personal friends still stand about 3 feet away and strangers about 4. So just kind of interesting to see that visually and say, okay, how far are people? I would suggest you try that with your friends and whatnot, but it'd probably not be the best idea, especially if they've had a cold or anything recently, because we do have a lot of people like with just general colds and flu and strep throat right now. Like there's a lot of strep throat going around, so please don't be drinking after each other. But you can find this on the Washington Post if you would like to. But, besides in different cultures, different contexts also have appropriate distances. So if I'm asking someone out on a date, so Kyler, I'm pretty sure you're married, right?
No.
Oh, well. Oh, I was about to be like, it's going to be less awkward if you're married. But, okay, so what are we, 30 feet apart probably? Roughly. If I ask someone out on a date from 30 feet, it's just going to be weird, right? Because that's way too far. If you ask it from a foot away from their face, that's way too close, right? There's an appropriate distance for that context of probably about an arm's length.
Why not? You can kiss and tell.
Kissing on the first date?
Why not?
I mean, I guess
they're different now.
That's true.
2021.
They're just like kissing through masks. Just put it on.
Actually, my friend got married and they had a kissing scene with a mask on.
Oh, that's cute. But in 5 years, because we've all had to stand a little bit further apart, our interpretation of the appropriate distance, it might change over the course of the next couple of years, because I can tell you, after having everyone have to stand 3-4 feet away from me at the store, I love it. Like, if I ever have someone like up against my back at the store again, I am probably gonna flip. Because it's nice to have that little bit extra personal space. But personal space in regards to contact or non-contact cultures, we talked about this or very, very briefly because it was a question on your midterm that we've already taken. But contact cultures are people stand more closely. So if we go back to that graphic that I actually closed down, like in Argentina, they stood very close together, despite them being in South America, but they stood really close together and used more direct eye contact. In the US, we tend to use a lot of direct eye contact. It depends on who you're with, if you touch them frequently or not, but if you're in a contact culture, you are touching more frequently, whether it's like a pat on the shoulder, you know, whatever. And they also tend to stand closer, but also speak louder. Oh yeah, so yeah, that was just kind of messed up, yeah. Argentina is in South America, they are contact cultures. Southern Europe, so like Italy, Greece, tend to be more contact cultures. Sorry, I did not see that down there. I was wondering, I was like, that's not right. And then non-contact cultures are more of like what you think of like American culture, Northern European cultures, like the Scandinavians. They stand a little bit further apart. They use less eye contact. I mean, Americans, I think, were the exception to that because we tend to use a lot of eye contact. But I think that just might be something more uniquely American. Huh?
It shows like who you're talking to.
Yeah. So we use eye contact to regulate conversation a lot, and since Americans, we do talk a lot, we use a lot of eye contact. But we tend to touch less often. Like, Kyla, can you remember the last time that you like patted one of your buddies on the shoulder? No. Brianna, can you remember the last time that you like made contact with one of your friends?
Yeah.
Oh. So.
Yesterday.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean yesterday.
I was the wrong person to join.
No, I mean, well, I touch my friends all the time. I know that sounds really weird, but like I pat them on the shoulder or I poke them or whatever. So that also sounded really weird. Brianna just, like I said, the caffeine's kicking in, guys. I apologize. But moving on to eye contact. See, aren't you glad you came to class today? You've gotten a lot of giggles out of it.
We have those all the time.
Yeah, when it's just us in here. Yeah, Ramon, if you don't kiss the homies goodnight, are you really homies?
Yes! Ramona.
Ramon is a king and everyone should know it. But like we just mentioned with eye contact, like Brianna said, eye contact helps us regulate conversation, but it also is considered an element of personal space. Because if I make eye contact with someone, it shortens the distance between us. So you know how like if someone is avoiding your eye contact, you think they're hiding something, they are attempting to, whether consciously or not, put more distance between you and them. Maybe not physical distance, because if you're both sitting down in a chair, then it would be even more awkward for them to like start scooting their chair away. But it's more easy to avoid eye contact. Like on a date, if you are maintaining good eye contact, you are closing that interpersonal distance. And if your date is like, nope, we are not looking at them, they are probably not very into it. Yeah, but the norms of eye contact, they vary from different cultures. America, we tend to have more eye contact. Chinese culture tends to have less eye contact. A lot of the Native American tribes tend to have less eye contact as well, because in a lot of places it communicates meanings related to respect and or status. So like in China, you don't really make eye contact with people who are a higher status than you. Here in the US, we don't have such a strict hierarchy. So I'm totally fine with walking up to my boss and making eye contact and asking questions, but that wouldn't really happen in China. And then like Brianna said, it helps regulate turn taking. So if, I don't know, who do I want to pick on? Who's on my list? Amy, who's at the top of my list. Maybe Amy and Brent and Bryn and I are talking, and you know, Amy just keeps on talking and talking and talking. I might make eye contact to be like, hey, you know, Brent has something to say or whatever, because it helps regulate turn taking.
Or just speak out loud.
Yeah, or just speak up and be like, hey, be quiet, I got something to say. But that would be rude or impolite in most situations. And then facial expressions. So do facial expressions mean the same thing all over the world? To an extent, yes, but also kind of no. So we have, I believe it's the 6 basic facial expressions. No, not Constitution. So which one of these is like not like super hideous? I want them listed, but I want them like listed that we can actually like read them. Okay, I mean, that's not like the worst, but oh no, I didn't want to download. Oh well, whatever. But our 6 basic facial expressions, quote unquote, are happiness / joy, you know, smiling, surprise, so like eyebrows raised, you have fear, eyebrows kind of scrunched in, you have disgust, which is that kind of like little bit of lip tilt, which ties in with contempt, you have anger, and then you have sadness or sorrow. But the thing with facial expressions is that they're not all caused by the same thing. So how many of you are willing to eat guinea pig? The 2 people in here just like laughed. So for most of us, that would, you know, when we think about eating guinea pig, we're probably like, oh, that's a little like gross, right? You know, those are pets. Or if we think about eating dog or horse or cat. But for like people in India, if you asked about like, how do you feel about eating cow? If they're Hindu, they're probably gonna be like, why would you eat cow? So what causes the emotions or causes the facial expressions are different, though we all do share those 6 basic ones. What causes people joy is different. What causes people sorrow is different. Actually, let me see what the next slide is. Okay, so one more thing I want to point out on the facial expressions is, let me pause the screen share for a sec so I can find this. So it's, no, I wanted like child. Anyways, okay, maybe, I think it was this thing I read a long time ago. But anyways, interesting article here about facial expressions. And I mean, this is like a psychology thing, but it's related to an extent. If someone is like sociopathic, or I'm not sure if they're differentiating here between psychopathic or sociopathic, but if they were a child, they had a harder time distinguishing between those 6 different facial expressions, or like expressions of fear or anger or sadness, because there was just a wiring in their brain that they weren't able to see those differences as much, so they weren't able to like understand that they were hurting someone else or causing someone else pain or sorrow, insert whatever here. So interesting research. I don't think it's like fully finished yet or totally like 100% true, because you know, you always need more research to back stuff up, but it's an interesting thing to think about. So do you have trouble differentiating between different facial expressions. But then moving on to more nonverbal, so our gestures. Gestures are our arm and hand movements. If you've seen me teaching, you probably notice that I use a lot of gestures because I do tend to talk with my hands. That's just how I was raised. That's what I do. Some people do, some people don't. A lot of it's just what culture you're raised in and what kind of family did you grow up in. Maybe you grew up in a very expressive family that talked loud and talked with their hands, or maybe you grew up in a more reserved one so that you don't do that. But there are 4 main kinds of gestures. So the first one is emblems, which is things that have a very specific verbal translation. So like if we wave hello, we don't have to shout hello because people know we're waving. And then I think one of the ones that people talked about was like the shaka in regards to like Hawaii. If you just show people the shaka or whatever, then they show it back and it's basically a greeting. Illustrators, so those are gestures that go along with your speech and kind of refer to it. So if I say, I caught a fish this big, that's an illustrator showing that the fish I caught was this big, or my niece is this tall, or it's, a lot of it you can refer to like size and stuff because it's really easy to illustrate size. Regulators, so gestures to guide the flow of conversation. So that could be like eye contact, being like, okay, well, it's your turn to talk now. Or kind of gesturing over and saying, hey, you probably shouldn't point at people, but it's like, hey, okay, well, Abby wants to talk. And then adapters are gestures related to managing our emotions. So this could be like if you're trying to stop yourself from crying, going to take a drink. If you're mad, clenching your fist. So trying to find some way to manage our emotions, or like if you can like feel the tears, you might rub your eyes. So any questions so far on any of this? I know I'm going through it like pretty quickly, but I think a lot of this stuff has been mentioned in passing. So we're just tapping up on it. And then you guys also have the readings and stuff that I'm sure no one is probably actually doing. But is what it is, I guess. Our time orientation, here in the US, we tend to be more monochronic, same with like a lot of the Northern Europe. Time is a commodity. So time is very important. If you're not on time, you're late. You can lose time very easily. You can waste time very easy. And then it's very linear. So first you go to this thing. Secondly, you do this. Next, you have to go to work, and then you have to go get lunch and blah, 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 blah. But monochronic cultures like ours, we tend to value punctuality, getting tasks finished, and following schedules. And then, of course, like if someone tends to be more polychronic in a monochronic culture, they tend to be seen as like, quote unquote, lazy. Because for people from polychronic cultures, time is more holistic. So you can have multiple things going on at once. You might quote unquote schedule 2 different things at the same time. Your personal obligations and your friends and your family are more important than sticking to a schedule. And you accomplish your tasks because of the personal relationships you have with other people, not in spite of them is the term. So in a monochronic culture, you might get tasks for work done despite your family calling you and despite wanting to get home, and cook dinner and do whatever. But, when people do have these 2 different time orientations, it can cause a lot of tension, because if you have half the group who is very polychronic, and it's like, no, like, who are never, quote unquote, on time to meetings, that can be very frustrating. But it's different, doesn't mean it's right or wrong. So what they think about the other. So people from monochronic culture think people from polychronic cultures never plan for the future. They're losing time and money or wasting time. And they cause so many problems because they don't ever plan anything out. And then polychronics tend to think monochronic People are just always in a hurry, you know, they're no fun. They don't give priority to actually living because they give all their priority to working, and they don't give the priority to people and relationships like they quote unquote should. So, okay, moment of silence while I like get my voice back while we talk about silence. But as you guys may be aware of, silence in the US is not really valued, hence why we have a class on public speaking that some of you guys are in, but not a class on effective listening, right? Which we probably should. But in the US, silence tends to be more awkward rather than constructive and tends to make people feel uncomfortable. And people talk to do that uncertainty reduction because Americans, we don't really like uncertainty. Just humans in general don't really like uncertainty. So I think I might have told this story before, but a couple semesters ago, I had a decent sized group of Native American kids here in my class who were from like Bailes and San Carlos. And one of them was, you know, he said, he's like, look, I can sit in a car with one of like my white friends and go to Phoenix and they will not stop talking. Like they want the radio on, they want to chat, they want to have some kind of noise going on. And it was hard for that student because he's like, no, like, can we just sit here in silence? And he said, it's like, if I go back to Bailes or San Carlos or Phoenix with one of my native friends, we can just sit there the entire car ride and not say a word, and it's totally fine. Because they have a different interpretation of silence. For them, silence was not uncomfortable. It was not awkward. It was just part of conversation. It was just part of that relationship building of, you know, we can sit here in silence and it's fine. So a couple other examples. So Japanese, they use silence to be polite and convey respect. I think there's like a really funny Finnish saying about silence too. But the Finnish, so Northern Europe, so present a fixed and expressionless face. From the amount of Finns that I have met, it's probably a stereotype, but it is slightly true, at least like when you first start to get to know them until they loosen up a bit. But if someone is too talkative, maybe they see that as unreliable, or, you know, they keep talking because they don't have anything actually in their head to think about. So they just keep moving their mouth. And then silence reflects thoughtfulness, consideration, and intelligence. And of course, there's always that saying of, you know, best to keep your mouth shut and think you're an idiot than to open your mouth and prove it for them, right? Okay. Oh, stereotypes. Woo, we did talk about stereotypes. But, you know, going back to stereotypes, just as a reminder, stereotypes are very natural boxes that our brain organizes things into. It's a very easy way for our brain to organize information. We just have to be aware of, are we overgeneralizing and stereotyping like people? Or do we understand like this might be a generalization, but I understand that not every person from Oklahoma is, you know, a hick. I hope you're not actually from Oklahoma.
No.
Okay. I can stereotype Oklahoma because I'm from Kansas. But yeah, we just have to, like, even, you know, in Americans, you know, everyone in this class lives currently in the US, because I don't think anyone else, like, I don't think we have anyone who's living internationally currently. But, you know, we're all quote unquote American or Americanized, but we don't all exhibit the exact same nonverbal behaviors, right? We don't all make the same eye contact. We don't all make the same gestures. We don't all use the same like hand signals to show people whatever. We don't all use the same facial expressions at the same thing. So we just have to make sure that we're not overgeneralizing and stereotyping. We do have generalizations, but just try not to actually stereotype and say, okay, well, I know that some people in this culture might do this, but I don't know if this particular person is or not if you haven't talked to them yet. Okay. Cultural spaces. I don't know. Do I want to talk about this or do I not? I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, I guess we go over it kind of quick. Okay, yeah, it's our last like 3 slides, so we'll go over it pretty quickly. And then you guys should have your examples of your different nonverbal codes from your cultures. I hope you guys remember to think about that. Because I'm going to ask everybody, and I'll probably start with you two since we're in class. So, but what are our cultural spaces? So our cultural spaces, you know, they're just, you know, the when and the where that we are from or are raised in. So it could be our actual home. So the immediate cultural context of one's upbringing. I was raised in Kansas for, well, I guess for about half of my childhood. But I consider myself a Kansan because that is the cultural context of what I grew up in. And even when I moved to other states like Colorado and Alaska, I still maintained that identity and how we did things because, you know, that's what I knew. And that's what my home life was. Your neighborhood. So if you have a neighborhood that is all or a majority of this type of people. So people tend to stereotypes ethnic neighborhoods as quote unquote ghetto. I mean, were you the one that said Safford had a ghetto like the other day, or was that someone else? Oh, okay. Is it mainly an ethnic neighborhood of some kind?
No, it's kind of a mixture. Like, I don't know, there's like white people who live there, there's Mexican, Hispanic,
Okay.
blacks, but it's more like you're more than likely to get stabbed or do wrong.
Okay, make note of myself to not go there. I do not want to get stabbed. But you know, it could be its own particular cultural identity. So sometimes you have like these really small, like little hamlets within towns that maybe that area does have its own particular little regional culture where there's specific rules where it says, hey, you would avoid this particular street after 9 p.m. because of X, Y, Z. Or everyone here in this neighborhood, you know, we all know that, you know, Joan down the road is really good at watching the kids and keeping an eye on them if they go to the park. Or insert whatever here. Or it could even be something like, oh, well, we know this neighborhood because it's all like the white people from Oklahoma cooking meth. Insert stereotype here. I apologize. But it could be, you know, that cultural space. It just depends on where it is, but they are all different. Yeah, it is what it is. And then regionalism might be your area that holds cultural meaning. So Kansas and Nebraska, and then I guess some of Oklahoma. You know, it's the Midwest. Kansas and Nebraska, you had a lot of German immigrants. So that's what Kansas and Nebraska, you know, cultural space is. It's, you know, the German immigrants from the 1800s. Those are the ones that settled in the Midwest, or at least in Kansas and Nebraska. I don't know what happened up in like the other Midwest states. But some people might hold really tightly to that. I'm gonna move that. Okay. So what happens when we change our cultural space? What happens when we move? So Brianna, are you from Safford originally?
No.
Okay, where'd you come from?
Tucson.
Tucson. So definitely a different culture here than there was in Tucson.
Yeah, but I was pretty much raised here. So like, I still have things that I do like that are from Tucson that, you know, I used to do. But I moved here when I was 9. So I was pretty much raised here. So like everything that happens here, I pretty much know and I would take with me anywhere.
Yeah. So. But let's say you move to Wyoming or New York or Vermont or insert whatever place here.
Definitely be different.
Yeah, we
definitely. Like with the way we dress.
Yeah, definitely different with the way we dress. It's pretty easy to pick out someone who's from this area. Just, I mean, based on how they're dressed, like, I mean, it is. And there's nothing wrong or bad about it. It's just like there's a particular way of dressing here in the Gila Valley. But of course, not everyone dresses the same way. Like, hence we can't stereotype and say all women here wear XYZ or all men wear cowboy boots and trucker hats.
Because most missionaries only wear dresses and or slacks.
But they can wear blue shirts now, though, too.
Oh.
But when we travel, whether it be because we're just going on a short little adventure somewhere on holiday, or if we're actually moving somewhere else, it helps change our, perception of what's going on, and it changes the cultural spaces that we're exposed to. We get to see more of what goes on in, the lives of other people, how other people live and how they act. It's not just on the television. Because we talked about like media presentation of other people, I think last week. I think so. I know we talked about it. I'm not sure what day, but I know we did. But we actually get to see what goes on in people's lives when we explore their neighborhoods and when we talk to them. And then, if we have migration, both immigration of people coming in and emigration of people leaving, it, brings change. So like New York City, San Francisco, they have huge immigrant populations and they have a very, very diverse culture. They have all these individual cultural spaces. They have Chinatown, like Little Poland, and different parts of the city that are specific cultural spaces that are both, some of that traditional culture, but also Americanized. Okay. And then of course, with the rise of the internet, it has definitely changed anything. How many of you guys use Reddit or some other form of like social media? I'm just going to assume most of us, because I know no one on Zoom is probably going to say anything. But it has definitely added a new dimension because, like it says, physical space is no longer a limiting factor. You can post on Reddit about Pokemon and get replies from 500 people all around the world with different things about Pokemon. You're not limited to just like, okay, who's within a 5-mile radius of me who's going to come to this game night at the gaming store, come to the game night at Cracked or whatever. You can talk to anyone and, become parts of different cultures. You can get gardening tips from someone in Egypt. You can make a documentary with someone in Iceland. So the internet definitely pushes the boundaries of what the traditional culture space was thought of, because now we have unlimited spaces to interact and create new cultures and new ways of doing things and new ways of believing. So as we wrap it up, before we do our short little quick activity in the last 10 minutes of class, just become more conscious of your nonverbal behaviors, like how are you standing, how are you behaving, and then just if you accidentally do a hand gesture or something that offends someone, just apologize. Most people are not, hopefully, knock on wood, going to take too much offense if you do it by a legitimate mistake. Try to look at other people's nonverbal communications and just understand that one sign does not mean that that's what they're thinking. You have to take multiple signs of it. Expand your nonverbal repertoire. Be flexible and adaptable, and just be aware if you have any stereotypes in your head or any assumptions that you may make. And honestly, I feel like this is like basically the same for every single chapter that we finished. Just be conscious, be aware, and think about what you're doing and why you are doing it. So I'm going to stop the recording, and then I'm going to start going through and asking you guys about some nonverbals from your particular cultures.